And Mark, let's move on. The next topic we're looking at is we're staying with the wide receiver theme here on the podcast and really staying within the NFC East in a sense, because Dez used to play for the Cowboys, which are in the NFC East. Now we're looking at another NFC East wide receiver, and Odell Beckham, who has agreed to a 5-year extension with the New York Football Giants, and it's going to make him the highest paid wide receiver in football. And according to the ESPN article, it says the 3-time Pro Bowler can receive a maximum $95 million over the course of the deal, $90 million base value plus a $5 million in incentives, with $65 million in total guaranteed money. And that is from Jalisa Anderson, who was reporting that. I want to ask you this, though, Mark. With this contract extension, did the Giants mess up, and are the Giants making a mistake by giving all this money to Odell Beckham?
It's a tough question to answer because really the answer is no, they're not making a mistake, because the alternative is not having Odell Beckham Jr., who is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. So you want him. You'd rather have him than not have him. And you don't also want to be the team that lets Odell go play for somebody else and then just goes balls out and is amazing for them, because we've already seen him be amazing. And let's be honest, Odell is the most popular player on the Giants.
Mm-hmm.
So if you let Odell walk, then there's going to be a lot of young kids with Odell Beckham Jr. jerseys that are going to be very mad about that. No one's buying an Eli Manning jersey, So they're going to need to keep him. They don't have a choice. Now, I totally get it in the sense of, did they mess up? Did they make a mistake? Because they have to pay him so much. But that's just how the NFL works. They kind of missed the opportunity that the Seattle Seahawks team had back in the day that, the Minnesota Vikings had with as young of a defense they had drafting that, as, well as the Eagles had last year, the LA Rams currently have, the Chicago Bears are hoping to have, all these teams with these young quarterbacks and young other players that they drafted well. That didn't work out for them. They tried it, and it just didn't work out because everybody got injured. That defense that they paid for didn't perform as well as they had hoped. They missed the window, essentially, on that. And now they got to pay people. And you can't just try and be like, well, we'll let Odell walk, and we'll just draft a better wide receiver. We did it once. We can do it again.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not that easy. Once again, ask one of those teams that I just mentioned, the Chicago Bears, how easy it is to draft a wide receiver. There's no guarantees in doing that, especially when you look at a guy like Kevin White, who finally maybe will get to actually play football. It's just they had to do it. It's the same thing with when you have one of those young quarterbacks that eventually need to get paid. Pretty soon it'll be Carson Wentz and Jared Goff that are up next, and they're going to both have their moments of being the highest paid quarterback in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Whichever one goes first will have it for a few days, and then the other one will come and take it from them. So they're going to have a big, huge contract sitting there on the books. It's just the way that it works. And now they got to figure out how they can draft young talent to do a good job with these big contracts that they have. And that's the job of being a GM. I don't think it's a mistake. I don't think they messed up. They had to do it. The mistake would have been letting Odell Beckham Jr. go play for somebody else.
Well, and that's why the question is kind of a catch-22 that we're asking here, is because, like you said, what were they going to do? Just let Odell Beckham walk and go to another team? But the point that I think I was thinking of with this contract is And the Giants are in an interesting situation because they do have Eli Manning, so it's not like oh my God, we had to go get a quarterback, but we spent the money on wide receiver instead. They have Eli. Odell Beckham's contract was coming up. They were going to give him this extension, and Eli's got this year, next year, and then he's a free agent. However, he'll be 39 at that point, so it's like, is the future going to be somebody else not named Eli at that point? But the thing that I look at is I just think of when you look at teams that have the highest paid wide receiver, and I just pulled up two separate articles, and this one's from NFL.com. Looking at the list of their top 5, and I know that some of it's subjective, but this top 5 of the highest paid wide receivers of all time. Number 1 that they list is Larry Fitzgerald. Now, Larry Fitzgerald has been to a Super Bowl, but the thing I will point out is, look at the quarterback that he had. He had Kurt Warner, who was no slouch. Calvin Johnson, who, yeah, he was on the Lions, so you could say that's a reason why he never went to the Super Bowl, but he was the highest paid wide receiver, and no matter how great he was, he alone was not going to get the Lions to the Super Bowl all by himself. Andre Johnson, another one. He was the highest paid wide receiver with the Texans. He also was not one of those guys. Randy Moss, who's a phenomenal wide receiver. He went to the Super Bowl with the Patriots, but you look at that Patriot team, they had Tom Brady, the GOAT, and when Randy Moss was with the Vikings, him and Chris Carter could do whatever they wanted. History was against them, and plus the quarterbacks for the Vikings were nothing like Randy Moss had when he was with the Patriots. And then you got Steve Smith, who, yes, he's been to a Super Bowl as well, but you look at the team around him, and it wasn't just him that brought them to the places that those teams were going. And the Giants, the thing is why I'm going to say that they didn't mess up is because Odell Beckham has an opportunity to be like he could be in the Steve Smith, the Randy Moss Patriot, and then the Larry Fitzgerald category of they got big contracts, but they had a quarterback behind them. They had coaches who put them in good situations. And the Giants could have that depending on how Eli plays this year and depending on how Pat Shurmur coaches this team as the head coach of the Giants this year.
Well, I think an interesting thing with what you were mentioning with those different highest paid wide receivers is that the majority of them, I think all but one, if I'm remembering right, all went to the Super Bowl. They didn't necessarily win, all of them, but they went. And
did Andre Johnson go to the Super Bowl?
Well, that's why I said all but one.
Yeah, so it would be him and Calvin.
Oh, Calvin. I was forgetting about Calvin Johnson.
Yeah, so all but 2.
So, yeah, all but 2. So the majority of them went.
Mm-hmm.
That's all you can ask for sometimes. I mean, obviously you want to win,
mm-hmm.
but you got to be there first in order to win, right?
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, really what it comes down to is it's going to come down to, can you draft good players?
Exactly.
And that's football in general, right? Because you talk about a few of those teams that had great teams put together. Well, part of that is, of course, having the ability to draft talented players, not just in the first round, but in the later rounds. And then it comes down to luck. Are they going to actually be healthy? I will always say, for all the people out there who are like, well, hey, you got Tom Brady late in the draft. That doesn't happen. That's
mm-hmm.
the exception to the rule. And I do not believe that when they drafted Tom Brady, they actually thought he was going to become the greatest quarterback of all time.
No.
There's no way that they had They might have thought, yeah, he could be good, sure. But they didn't know what he was actually going to be. So luck comes into it all the time in the draft. But it's going to be all about, can the Giants now find that young talent through the draft, really hit on all their picks, get those undrafted free agents that are going to turn into somebody worthwhile?
Mm-hmm.
Are they going to be able to pull it off? And that comes up to your GM. That's what they're responsible for. Whether Odell got that huge deal or not, they were going to spend money on somebody. The fortunate thing for them is Eli Manning's going to be gone sometime soon.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to be out of the NFL. He's going to retire. He's going to sit back, enjoy life, being Peyton's equal brother. And, you're going to have to move on to a new young quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be so telling for them because they're paying all this money for Odell Beckham Jr. But if they don't hit on that eventual quarterback that they're most likely going to be drafting in 1, 2, 3 years, it doesn't matter what you paid Odell Beckham Jr. because you didn't have anybody that could throw him the ball. And there's not somebody on the roster right now, once Eli is gone, that is going to be your quarterback of the future. So you're going to desperately need to hit on that player. And you can't wait. They can't just hope that things are going to work out. They need to go out there and get somebody soon, hopefully next draft. But they might not be in a position to where they've got the number one guy. And this draft coming up is not really a draft where there are many people that are that confident in those quarterbacks. So they got to figure something out because they're paying a lot of money to a wide receiver that might not have anybody worthwhile throwing him the ball in a couple of years.
Well, and that's why I'm glad you brought that up because I feel like the Giants are in the future is in a sticky situation. As of right now, this next season coming up, they're in prime contention to possibly be a playoff team. However, like you said, Eli is not going to be there forever. He's got this year, he's got next year, and then he's done. I'm going to be honest. He's an unrestricted free agent. At the age of 39, I would be surprised if the Giants bring him back. That means after this season, you have the 2019 draft, who you already mentioned. This could be like a similar draft to the E.J. Manuel draft of quarterbacks, where we went through it on a past podcast of how many of those guys are even still in the league anymore, let alone starting in the NFL. And then you have the 2020 draft, and it's kind of a, like I said, sticky situation because if you look at the possible quarterbacks you could have, I'm looking at a mock draft from WalterFootball.com. Number 1 pick, they got Jake Fromm, quarterback from Georgia. Then you have the number 2 pick, which would be Tua Tagovailoa, who could be the starting quarterback for Alabama this year, won them the national championship last year. Then you have number 3, Jacob Eason, who used to be at Georgia, now is at Washington. Many, myself included, have compared him to Matthew Stafford in his ability. Those are the main quarterbacks that you have in that draft in 2013. But number 2 is, if this team wins with Pat Shurmur, are they going to be in a position to get one of those 3 quarterbacks, depending on how the next few seasons in college football go? That means, in my mind, if you're not going to be able to get one of those guys, are you going to be able to do it in free agency? And when you look, and I know that extensions can happen, but Drew Brees is technically a free agent. I think Drew Brees will be done by 2020 because he'll be, what would that be? He'll be 41 that year? Yeah, he'll be 41 by when he is an unrestricted free agent. Then you have Aaron Rodgers, who will probably get an extension and stay with the Packers. Russell Wilson will probably get an extension, stay with the Seahawks. Big Ben could be retired, but if he's not and the Steelers say, adios, we're moving on, how much are you going to have to pay for him? Then you have Eli, which we've already discussed, will probably be done. Phillip Rivers, it's hard to say what'll happen. He'll be 38 by that time. Then you have the prime two, the more than likely guys that you're looking at. Sam Bradford, who will be 32. Case Keenum, who will be 32. Jameis Winston, who would be 26 at the time. And Nick Foles, who would be 31. The question is, if a guy like Big Ben hits the market, how much are you going to, A, have to pay for him? And because you gave Odell all this money, can you pay to get a guy, even if like a guy like Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers hit the market for some God-foreseen reason? You gave Odell so much money, you might not be able to go out and pay one of those quarterbacks. So you might have to settle. Like, I could see the Giants drafting a quarterback and then doing kind of like the Cardinals did. Hey, we drafted a guy like Josh Rosen early on, traded up to get him, and then sign either 32-year-old Sam Bradford or Case Keenum or even Nick Foles to kind of be there in case they need to start a veteran presence for the 2020 season.
It's possible, and it's so hard to predict because we're looking too far into the future where some of these guys might have retired early, might get too hurt, like a Sam Bradford. He might be like, nope, I'm done. Sorry, guys. Jameis Winston, maybe he sticks around with Tampa Bay.
He could get cut sooner.
I mean, he might be gone, but he also might stick around. You know, Tampa Bay might want to keep him. It's difficult to say. And you have other quarterbacks who might surprise us where they fall off the cliff, you know, and then all of a sudden, hey, this person's available. So it'll be interesting, that's for sure. It's going to be difficult for the Giants because they didn't have a choice. This is what Odell is worth. You couldn't let him go. It really is that simple. But it's the rest of it now. Now the pressure definitely is on for the scouts, for your GM, for your coaches to do it right, to get the most out of these players because you're spending a lot of money. It's time to start winning. Odell Beckham Jr. said it himself that he doesn't feel like he's done anything yet for New York because he's here to win titles. You know, he wants to win those trophies, and he hasn't won those trophies yet. So I think that's a good attitude to have because, you know, there's been a lot of hype around the football Giants for a while, and it hasn't worked out yet. So something's got to change about that.
Well, and the thing that I started to look at after you mentioned that, because it's important, is the last two Super Bowls the Giants won were in 2011 and 2007. One was way before, like 7 years before Odell was in the league. The other one was 3 years before. Ever since Odell has been on the Giants, and I know that last year he was injured, they've only had one winning season. They've been 6-10, 6-10, 11-5, but lost in the wild card round to the Packers. I believe that was, correct me if I'm wrong, was that the game where he got upset with the kicking net? Did that happen in the playoffs where he got upset with the kicking net?
I don't think it did, but I could easily be wrong. I thought that was a different game.
But the point is they were 11-5, lost to the Packers. The only reason I remember that game is because the TV that I currently have, I got it that day because when I turned it on, it was the playoff game. And then last year he was injured, but they were 13-3. So, I mean, the last question I'm going to ask you, and this kind of prompts it, is when Odell Beckham's career is over and done, or let's say when this contract is over and done, if you were to say you have three choices, Odell Beckham will be a Super Bowl champion with the Giants, he will fall into the category of the Randy Moss, the Larry Fitzgerald, of the Steve Smith of like, hey, my team got to the Super Bowl, but we couldn't win it? Or will he fall into the third category of the Calvin Johnsons, of the Andre Johnsons, of my team just never made it to the Super Bowl with me on their team?
Yeah, I'm leaning towards that last category of my team just never made it. And part of that's because the Super Bowl is hard to get to. It really is. It is a challenging game to get to. You got to go through a lot. You got to do a lot, but you got to trust that everything's working. Your players have to play as well as possible. Your team has to work together. Your team has to be pretty much a whole team. You can't get there with just parts unless you've got Tom Brady out there or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So you need everything to go well. You need to have drafted that team well. You need to have signed the right free agents. You need to have the right coach who's got the right coaching plan, who's got the right game plan. Everything has to go right. And for me, when I'm looking at the Giants, they've kind of missed some of those opportunities. Things have kind of gone wrong for them, unfortunately. And unless they hit on that quarterback, I think they probably will have kind of wasted one of the better wide receivers that they've had. And it's totally possible that they go out there and, maybe next year they draft a quarterback and he's awesome. They did it right, and they got the quarterback of their future, their franchise guy. That's totally possible. But it's also totally possible and quite likely that if they do, that quarterback is not a complete hit. Not necessarily that he's a bust, but he just might not be what they expected. More often than not, when a team drafts a quarterback, they're not going to be a franchise quarterback.
Exactly.
So they have to hit on that. They have to hit on the rest of the draft, too. And I just think that timeline-wise, I don't know that it's lining up well enough. They need to get some good luck in their favor if they want to win a Super Bowl anytime soon.
You know what I find funny about the contract? There is a potential out in 2021. So what could technically happen? Well, before I say this, I'm going to say I agree with you. I think Odell Beckham is going to, when it's all said and done, he will fall into the category of, I'm going to say Calvin Johnson particularly, because Calvin Johnson in his seasons from 2007 to 2015, the Lions, and of course you can say, oh, but Ricky, it's the Lions. The Lions only made the playoffs twice, losing both in the wild card round. I could easily see this Giant team making the playoffs one more time with Odell, but then losing in the wild card round. Andre Johnson from 2003 to 2015 with the Houston Texans. I believe it was 2015. No, 2014. 2015 he was with the Colts, but 2014 he went to the playoffs only twice as well. However, both of his Texan teams beat the Bengals, and I know what you can say again, Ricky, if they didn't play the Bengals, would they have really won those games? But they beat the Bengals and lost in the divisional round to the Ravens and Patriots in those years. I think that Odell could fall into the Calvin Johnson side of that and not get out of the wild card. But I find it funny that this contract, it's a 5-year extension, but they have the possibility to cut him after 2 years. And the reason I find that funny is because of everything we talked about. After the 2019 season is when Eli Manning becomes a unrestricted free agent, so he'll probably be gone, when they would most likely be drafting their next quarterback of the future. And if they feel after that 2020 season that, hey, this has got a cap hold on us and it's not really helping us to have him here, there's a possibility, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but there's a possibility that Odell Beckham might not see this contract all the way through. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it's interesting of where the Giants would put that potential out, even after, especially after everything that we've already talked about with Eli Manning and that 2020 season.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, that's all just the way these contracts work and stuff like that, because teams got to cover themselves. But it is interesting that, they could decide to go in a different direction if they want.
Well, this is where you guys tell us what you think down below in that comment section. What do you think of the Odell contract? What do you think of the Giants' future with Eli and his contract ending after the 2019 season, the potential out that we mentioned at the end? What do you think about everything we talked about when it comes to Odell, the Giants, and this contract?